All right, well, thank you for joining us. We are the oldest 5 of the Ware children, and I think we're here to talk and tell stories about growing up in this household. We'll introduce ourselves. I'm Justin Ware, I'm the oldest, and pass it over to Lindsay.
I'm Lindsay, and I live in Kentucky, and I am the most prolific Ware child yet, and I have 6 children.
I'm Caleb Ware. I've been married for 10 years, live in Owensboro, Kentucky. We've got 3 children. We've got a 7-year-old, 5-year-old, and soon to be a 2-year-old.
I'm Sarah Leacock. I am the 4th oldest after Caleb. I live in Indiana with my husband and 2 children. I have a toddler who's almost 2 and a 4-month-old.
My name's Abigail Matthews. I have been married for almost 8 years, and I have 3 children, and I live in Kentucky.
So as the oldest, I guess I should talk a little bit about myself, introducing my story. So I grew up here in Kentucky, and when I turned 17, or when I was 17, I moved out to Moscow, Idaho, and attended New St. Andrews College, and got a job there, met a girl there, and so I've been married and lived in Moscow ever since. I've got 4 children, and I'm currently back here in Kentucky as we come every year to enjoy my parents' hospitality. So to kick it off, story time, I guess. The thing I appreciate in my memory the most, I think, about my parents is, aside from the obvious things, giving us a godly education, is my dad's insistence on singing. So every night, ever since I was a very, very small child, pull out the psalters, pass them around the table, and we'd sing before we'd eat, and sometimes after we eat too. And this is a practice we still have today. And my parents have a lot of psalters now because a lot of grandchildren and children. But what stands out to me about that practice is my dad, as many of you probably have experienced, lacked a good musical education as a child. And so he knew he couldn't sing well, but he insisted on doing it anyways. And as a young man, that made a big impression on me. Doing something you're not good at doing and insisting on it, knowing that it's important. And the result of that was when I left to go to college, I knew at least several dozen psalms by heart, and singing is just such a potent singing the Psalms in particular is such a potent expression of faith. It gives both courage and comfort, depending on the situation. And so that was something that has always stuck with me, not just in my childhood, but as an adult. So I do the same thing in my home. We sing after dinner, and I've been blessed with that good musical education, and so now I can pass it on to my children. But that's something I think that a lot more families need to do, a lot more fathers need to do. And so that's whenever I encounter others, it's been such a blessing to me. I want to encourage others in the same way.
One thing I like about that too is I feel like in the modern church, sometimes if you ever look at the choir or whatever, it's like almost always women, and there's like the token male figure. And I love that it's like telling, as a mom of boys, telling our sons, like, singing is not a feminine thing.
Right.
It can be a very masculine thing. And like, as a mom, I'm like, you're going to do it, whether or not you like it. So just kind of that insistence on that. So
I think generally women, I think lots of most little girls go through a stage where they sing and they pretend to be a singer, and boys not necessarily as much. And so I think women tend to be more comfortable with singing than men are. And so, yeah.
It's a push.
Mom is a lot more musical than dad is. So It would have been very easy for him to just put it off on her. But he didn't.
Yeah, and to be clear, he relied on mom to get us started, right? On the right pitch, right tempo, right tune. But it was always him initiating that. And again, as a young man, the fact that this was what my father did and what he wanted to do, it's huge. And I think you're right. It instills from early on, this is a masculine thing to do, and boys should do it. So
I think that's one thing I really like about Dad too, is that he, if he believes something's right, he's gonna do it, no matter how uncool it is. How
He's
weird
not good at
is.
it.
And there's been some things he's kind of repented from, like I remember growing up, like we weren't allowed to have Christmas trees when we were little kids, or I don't even know if we're allowed to have Christmas lights. I don't know. There was like some weird stuff like that, but that's what he thought was right, and that's what he was willing to do, no matter what other people thought about it. And as he's gotten older and wiser, like his opinions have been more fine-tuned, I would say. But I appreciate that he's always willing to do it, what he thinks is right. So,
On the singing, really quickly, I remember Dr. Erb, who's a musical director at NSA, telling us one time, giving us this long exhortation. He loves to talk about how important singing is, but he said that sing is the most common command in the whole Bible. It's like hundreds of times, like in the Psalms and other books of the Bible, it says sing as a command. And so that's something that gets passed over a lot.
what about you, Lindsay?
memories.
Yeah.
Okay, so a good memory I have is I was thinking about this as like being a mom and having my own house. Just the other day, I was just thinking about this. Like I remember, especially maybe when I was like college or, even when I graduated college and living at home for a little bit, I remember like there was once or twice, there'd be like this new young lady at church who was about my age. And I could just go up to her and say, hey, you want to come over for lunch today? It was Sunday. And my mom was always okay with that. And I never remember her saying, oh no, our house isn't clean enough, or there's not enough food. Like there was always enough food. And I'm sure mom cared about the house, but like she never let that stop her from showing hospitality. Mm-hmm. And I was thinking, like as a kid, you just kind of take that for granted. And now as a mom, you're like, oh, we should have someone over, but I'm like, but I'm so tired, or there's not enough food, or but then I have to clean and vacuum, and or my bathroom's clean, and like this whole thing, like. So it just, you realize like the other side of it, like, wow, that was really impressive that she always had such an open house.
Well, and I think as like Christians, like you go to Christians' houses and you can't touch anything. Everything's like so perfect. You're like, oh, I feel really awkward. But whenever you're able to go into like, especially as someone who's maybe not a Christian, if you can go into someone else's home, that you're like, oh, they live very similar to how I live, or you know what I mean? Like they don't have to make everything perfect in like a little box, Yeah. I don't know. It helps.
I think, hospitality is a lot of muscle memory because we had people over so often, especially for like small group where there'd be like 80 people at our house, like you just get used to it, and then it becomes less of a big deal. Because something that I struggle with sometimes is when I'm not in the habit of having people over, then it feels like a much bigger deal, and it's like, oh, I have to have the house clean, and I have to have like just this meal. And when you're in the habit of having people over regularly, you're like, oh, we'll just have what
and
we're
mom
gonna have.
had a habit too of always making a nice lunch for Sunday.
That's
another thing I
we cleaned on Saturday.
Because I was always so tired by the time we get to Sunday. I'm like, oh, well, just get some leftovers out of the fridge or something really easy. But she always had like a Sunday lunch that we could come home to after church.
Or have people over.
So, yeah.
I think they demonstrated practicing hospitality. It's a muscle memory, exactly like Sarah said, is as you continue to have hospitality, something you grow with, you learn how to do it. You clean the house the Saturday before, you over prepare for Sunday, having an abundance of food that you can just, hey, you guys want to come on over? Bring the guest over from visiting your church. Hey, we got extra food today. Would your family like to come over? And that's something that our parents did regularly, and I think that's something that's rubbed off on all of us. And it's a good practice, and that we need to keep going. As Christians, we're called to hospitality. It's not something you can just randomly do. You have to prepare for, have it in advance, and like
a lot of hard
work.
It
takes work. It takes work and preparedness and buying things, extra chairs or whatever it may be, to be able to prepare for that kind of things.
Lights, I
think one of the things I realized most, I've only been a parent for less than 2 years, but you start to realize like, wow, kids just like are so ungrateful by nature because they just take everything for granted. Like it's only now as an adult having my own house, having children, that I'm starting to recognize all of the things that our parents did, the things that we just took for granted because it's the way that it was, and you don't think about
it. After I had my first baby, I was like, Mom did this 10 times. I'm never going to make it.
That's kind of what I wanted to talk about, was the instilling of hard work from both our parents, from our mom, who made meals for 10 children consistently, having dinner prepared and ready for when Dad got home, and having to where he could have his Bible study and the kids doing dishes. But she had to prepare all that food consistently and on time, and she did. And she did a wonderful service to the whole family by doing that. And then to Dad being faithful and ministering to us in Bible study, from checking out, from reading the scripture and praying or singing like Justin said. But the biggest thing is the sacrifice that she put into that was huge, and it should not be looked over in any way, because it's a lot of work just for several children, but she did it for 10. That's amazing.
And now she's doing it for like 40 people.
And now she's doing it for 40 people.
Not all the time.
But I learned hard work from seeing my mom's example. But from my dad, I'm appreciative because he took the time to, the firewood for me was really big. And preparing, we heated our house with a wood stove for years. And so my dad would take us out in the spring, Justin and I, and sometimes Zach and Ethan, when they were old enough, they would come too. But he'd stuff us in this little SR5 Toyota truck, and I'd sit in the back, squished up in the little seat. And he'd take us over there, and he'd be cutting firewood, and Justin and I would carry these big old logs, and we were just little guys. And he seems like he'd go get firewood from the farthest possible off the road way that he can go, and we'd have to walk several acres, sometimes up hills, and put them in his truck and go collect it and pull brush. But it really taught a lot of hard work, a lot of sweat equity. And now I've purposely bought a chainsaw that I'm using to help other people's in their houses or whatever, and I'm having my son come along and haul wood and brush, and I'm trying to do the same thing my father. He showed me a good example of how to work hard, and that was one of the things that really stood out to me. And I appreciated about both our parents was they were no strangers to hard work, and instilled it in each one of their children, I think.
Was it Justin allergic, or are you not allergic to poison ivy?
I'm not.
So I feel like there's a memory of Justin just rubbing poison ivy all over himself.
It was poison oak. I was wiping the sweat off.
That's so great.
It was fine. I didn't have any reaction at all. It's a superpower.
Yeah. Well, hopefully with your chainsaw, you're more careful than Dad. I remember Dad sliced the top of his foot with the chainsaw.
He's like, I'm going to cut something real quick, and he's wearing his same. I'm not going to like just one thing. It'll be so fast. And then he had to like travel across the country the next day.
He was traveling to Europe.
No, but he cuts his foot. He comes out. He goes, "Joy, I need a Band-Aid."
And his foot's like dangling.
Chunk out of his foot. I need a Band-Aid. I think
Is that your happy story?
I just remembered it. With my, just tagging on what Caleb said, one thing that I didn't realize for a long time was that Dad worked really hard when he was at work, but he always made sure to be home in time for dinner. And especially as a man who had so many kids, I think it would have been really easy for him to be a workaholic and to be at work all of the time. But he got up and he would go to work at the same time every day, and he would come home, I feel like, at the same time every day.
I don't really remember him working a lot of overtime, do you?
No.
Just like staying at the
long
office
trips.
late. I mean, you go on long trips a lot, but
He couldn't help that, but like,
but like I don't remember him.
for a
like,
man who has, for a man who has the weight of caring for, like, having to make enough money to provide for such a large family, I think it would have been very easy for him to be at the office for like 80 hours a week. But he worked really hard, and he was very faithful, and he rose really high in his organization without sacrificing his time with his family, which I really admire and didn't recognize as abnormal until an adult.
Well, I think that's just a blessing of, just a way that God blessed him, like when he says, like, if you're faithful with little things, you'll be faithful with much. And I think that that's what Dad did at work. He was very faithful with all the little things. And so God blessed him in having his overseers acknowledge that. And I think that's, why he did so well too at work.
Yeah. But I remember him telling me that the hardest or the best thing he ever did on his grades was when he was in college and he was married and like mom was pregnant. And he had so much to do that he had to be really careful with his time. And so I think that's something that he learned there was he would work really, I'm assuming he had to work really hard the hours that he was at work. He wasn't like putzing around, and he filled his time well, and then he was able to come home because he made that important. So my story kind of relates to what I was talking about, how Dad used to go on long trips. Now, as a mother of two small children, I can't imagine. Like, my husband will be gone for a weekend and he comes back and I'm like, praise the Lord, you're back. So Dad would sometimes have to go to Europe for like 2 weeks.
And they didn't have family nearby. Like now, like we're all like, I was like, I'll just move into Mom's house for the week, or like I'm Mom, like, will you babysit? And Mom said, I'll bring you dinner. Like Mom and Dad never had that.
And Mrs. Collier would help out sometimes. Like we had friends who would occasionally.
Even.
Yeah. But what I was going to say, one thing that I remember that Mom would try to do is, I feel like anytime Dad went on a long trip, she would do like something fun. So she had this, it was Mama Joy's Crazy Day Cafe.
Yeah.
And in our old kitchen, we had these glass doors that would close, and she would like lock them, and she would put a sign on them that like you couldn't go in, which honestly now I think was also just a way for her to get a little peace and quiet, probably.
Never thought about it.
But she would prepare some special dinner. So sometimes it was like Italian night, and she would like put a checkered tablecloth on the table.
Wasn't there like
and
green night?
Yeah, one time she dyed like hamburger buns green, and we had green lettuce and green
Lettuce,
ketchup,
broccoli.
I don't know,
like
everything was
green
green.
apples and green jelly.
Yeah,
Something like
but
that.
she would make some sort of special meal or something fun. And as a mom now, it's very easy, especially when your husband is gone, to just like go into survival mode and be like, I'm just gonna do the bare minimum.
Here's mac and cheese again.
Yeah.
But so that was a special memory, that she would like do something to make it more fun and exciting.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing I remember her doing is chasing us around, snapping us with a towel.
Yeah.
And you just went
My kids always want me to do stuff like that. Like they're like, "Will you chase us and try to get us?" And I'm like, so tired. I'm like, no.
Yeah, but she would do that. She would snap a towel and you'd run, and it's like
You
the
guys
most
would always
exhilarating.
sacrifice the youngest child to go look for the mom.
The roof start. Go.
Yeah, you go. My kids
Zach, you know what's happening there. We'll just wait out here.
Yeah, but yeah. So I think that that's something that I didn't appreciate then, but I appreciate a lot more now, is that she would try to do things to make it fun for us and to have fun with us. So try to be a more joyful mother of children instead of just endure.
It's not a drudgery, even though sometimes it feels like it.
Yeah, I'm sure it did feel like it for her a lot.
Yeah, probably. Well, I guess a couple things, like one thing I appreciate is, one thing with Dad is, especially I realized as I've gotten older, is like when I go and ask him questions and talk about concerns or this or that, he responds in a firm but not condescending way. So when you ask him about stuff, sometimes I feel like you can get really condescending answers from other people, but I feel like he's always really firm but gentle when he talks to you, like with conviction, but also not like, you don't know anything, you know what I mean? Like, and I always appreciate that. Like, I feel like he really kind of gets on your level and talks to you about, works through stuff, which I appreciate. But I think for me, traditions was a big thing that I really appreciate Mom and Dad doing. Like, one thing I want to do with my kids is always on Christmas Eve, we'd always try to get up, or Christmas Day, we'd get up way too early. And so then after a while, Mom was like, okay, I'm going to put your stockings on the end of the bed. So you can wake up at 3 a.m, but you have to stay in your room until Mom and Dad say you're allowed to come out. But you can open your stockings. So that way, me and like Zach and like some of the younger kids would always pile in together and like open them up first thing at like 4 a.m. But then we'd stay in our room. And I feel like that was very smart, and also just made it really memorable and like really, really fun. And also just like Christmas Eve traditions that we do as a family even now. I'm trying to think. There were just other traditions. I feel like Mom made small things just really, really fun and really memorable, and I really appreciate
Set the
that.
table really nice.
Yeah.
Things like that.
Yeah.
And we still do the Christmas Eve tradition of picnic in the living room with a movie,
Yeah.
roasting hot dogs over the fire. Yeah.
Or Mom did like a big thing where like we'd all have to make gifts for each other, so we'd pick a random name. Yeah, homemade presents, and then we'd exchange those on Christmas Eve instead of on Christmas Day. And even now, we still try to do that, even though some people are in Idaho and we have to mail gifts and stuff. It's a little complicated.
Tricky, but
Yeah, I was just saying, when we were little, it was like when it was like you had to be 5 years old before you could do the homemade gift thing, and you'd be like, I hope Mom or Dad gets me, because like the 5-year-old gets you and you get like, I'm trying to think of what some of the
chocolate covered pretzels.
those are like the better gifts now. Sometimes you
A
get
balloon
like,
with sunflower seeds in it.
you do what?
A balloon with sunflower seeds.
Oh, that's like a stress ball, yeah. No, I feel like so that I think one of the kids once made Dad like fire starters, which were like old toilet paper tubes and like newspaper stuffed in them or something.
But that reminds me, talking about younger siblings, I was thinking, for us, like I feel like we probably all have hard, I don't know if hard is the right word, but interesting memories because like I'm almost 20 years older than Bella, the youngest sister. So like one thing I was thinking about the other day is my poor husband. I think he got it the worst out of all of our spouses. The torture.
He was the first man. He was the first suitor.
And he's one of the few that were like in town.
Yeah.
And so like he would come over and then like Zach and Ethan would be trying to wrestle him and like Zach would tell him jokes that
Now your kids do that to us, so.
he would do a super great job telling the joke. And then this is like still slightly horrifies me, like the 2-year-old is like potty training, and so she wants my husband to hold her, but I'm like, stop, she's not wearing any underwear, you know?
So, to be fair, we all dated Aaron before you ever dated Aaron because he would always come over to our house before you even moved back to Owensboro. So he like recently moved, no, he didn't move to the area, but like he started attending our church, and Dad was like, this single guy, I don't know, let's have him over all the time. And so
Courtship. He has to
be
date
fair, we all dated him first. So.
True. It's true.
And making fun of Aaron in loving ways is a favorite pastime.
Oh yeah, and then like you and Zach and Ethan, like we were having an engagement party or something, and they like performed this entire skit, basically mocking my husband for everybody to laugh at.
We were like, what was it?
Because they were such cool teenagers.
Yeah, we were, and it was one of the things.
What did they say it?
No, it was
for
me,
you,
Zach, and Ethan, and like I think Zach was playing Dad, and I was playing Lindsay, and Ethan was playing Aaron. And one of the questions was like, Zach was like, so I see that you have musical experience. And he's like, yes, I did tour with the Jonas Brothers back in the day, or something like that.
Man.
I don't remember. I wrote the script, but I don't remember what I said. So.
I'm trying to think of something edifying to say now. But I feel like there was
You've said enough.
something on the cusp of my memory.
But I mean, it's also good things about like having the big family, because even though it's like Justin never lived in the house with the youngest 2 girls, like they were never resided in.
They were born after I moved.
Yeah.
And I mean, me too, for the most part. But like, it's fun, you know, because then when they were little and I was just starting my family, like Mom and Dad would go out of town and I would babysit the girls for several days or nights. Like they would spend several nights in a row at my house. But then like as they got older, now they like babysit our kids. So it's kind of been a fun, interesting like family dynamic, where I was actually talking to my kids about this other day, and they said, yeah, they're more like our cousins than our aunts, you know. And
they would disagree. Bella and Judy would disagree. But yeah, it's true.
Yeah. I remember the thing that I was going to say. Well, going off of that, people ask about what it's like having such a big spread out family, and I think that there are trade-offs where, like, yeah, you weren't super close with Bella and Jubilee because they're more than 20 years younger than you. Like, it's just a different dynamic. But it's also very sweet to have it. Well, first of all, people ask, like, questions, and you're like, what, do you want me to, like, get rid of some of my siblings? Like, who are we going to, like, vote off the island? First of all. But then it's a trade-off. Like, you miss things. Like, you don't have the same closeness as, like, some families of, like, 2 or 3 kids where you only have those siblings. But then you get other things in it. Trade-off. Like, you get other things that you wouldn't have had otherwise. So I think that's
and part of me feels sad that Bella and Juby didn't get to experience the big dance parties we'd have outside. You know, Grandma and Grandpa would be visiting. They brought us all their 80s clothes. Wasn't it 70s or 80s? 70s probably. And they would turn on ABBA and we'd all go dance outside and stuff.
I don't think Justin danced outside.
Okay, the rest of us. And Caleb had this really cool Mickey Mouse costume.
yeah.
Don't remember this.
We'd have like our Barney outfits on. We'd be dancing outside. It was really fun.
Yeah.
But yeah, it makes me sad. But we're creating new memories with them.
I think it'll be really interesting to see the difference between what our reminiscences are and what we think about versus what they think about. Because like Lindsay said, the times that are, you know, our childhoods were taking place in the 80s and 90s and their childhoods were taking place
or
in
the early 2000s.
Yeah, but like
the
we were
90s, yeah.
In the 80s and
95,
different, yeah.
What was I was curious, I had a question that the experience of homeschooling, that we were all homeschooled kindergarten through 12, which I think was wonderful. I think there's probably some trade-offs. I was just curious what your guys have any opinions on it. What you
mine
thought.
was different because by the time I got to high school, I was doing classical conversations. So you guys never experienced that.
As a homeschool mom myself, I think one thing just amazes me that like they homeschooled pre-internet.
Oh yeah.
You know, like me, I'm like, what curriculum do I want? And I'm watching YouTube videos and I'm scrolling through websites and I'm reading reviews. I don't know what did you pick it out of a catalog.
Dad just like picked a bunch of old books for us to read mostly, and then we did Saxon.
I think we got advice from other people that were homeschooling too.
I know, but still,
or
like,
magazines.
There's no podcast. There's no nothing.
Yeah.
So I mean, the fact that they were doing it, and I think that they got better at it.
Yeah.
As time went on.
What are you saying?
We got smarter.
It was. I'll just say, it was wonderful. Before classical Christian homeschooling, I think, was a thing, they were doing it, and I don't know how aware they were of what they were doing. But when I went to New St. Andrews to get a classical with a large degree, as you did, I felt incredibly well prepared. There were lots of kids coming out of classical Christian schools that were not as well prepared as we were. So they did a really wonderful job.
I can see some weaknesses, to be honest, but I mean, and I know other homeschool kids that really harp on all the weaknesses and all the gaps, but I think in any education, you're going to always there's always going to be some gap or whatever.
Yeah.
And so when
astronomy.
I think back,
we didn't have much astronomy.
When I think about I just have gratitude personally. I mean, I feel like I can see some things okay, I want to do a little better with my kids on that or whatever. But the overwhelming feeling is just 100% gratitude and thankfulness.
I think that God was really kind to our parents and to us in that there were weaknesses or gaps, but they weren't important enough that they weren't things that we couldn't learn later. They weren't things that left us ill prepared for life or college. I went to New St. Andrews, and like you said, I was better prepared than some of those kids who had checked all of the boxes.
Yeah.
Geography, I never did geography until I got to college, and I was where's Russia? I don't know. I don't know where Russia is.
We had to learn to draw the entire world with
so classical conversations is different. Totally different experience, but there were things, or English. I don't remember doing an English curriculum, but I read so much that when I took the ACT, I did really well in the English section, even though I didn't know the reasons for why things were the way they were. I just knew the way that they should be.
And I think that Mom and Dad always said, education is discipleship.
Yeah.
So if they're teaching you to love to read, they're teaching you to work hard, they're teaching you how to teach yourself.
Yeah,
then when you graduate and you find those gaps, you know how to take care of those gaps yourself.
I just look at them up.
Well, that's true, because I got to high school, and that's when I started classical conversations. I felt like I was very ill prepared in the writing department, writing papers. But then as soon as I started classical conversations, it was you have to do a ton of papers, and I did catch on I had one or two really bad papers, but then from then on, I was oh, this is how you do it. It's easy. You know what I mean?
While there were weaknesses, I would say they weren't integral. They didn't hamstring us. I think that we were able to shore up those weaknesses with the things that they did give us.
Homeschooling my kids, that gives me such confidence too.
Yeah.
Mom and Dad had these weaknesses, and look at the jobs that we have been able to, we've graduated college, we've graduated with honors, we have these jobs, we have, these different things I haven't. These different things that we've accomplished, and seeing okay, even with those weaknesses, we were able to do different things. So
were you going to say something, Joe?
Yeah, I think the homeschooling thing, what it did teach us was independence. I think we're all fiercely independent, want to be fiercely independent, probably to a fault in some degrees. But that's what our parents instilled in us, and really with education too, is you have to take your education. You have to be the directive behind it, and you have to take accountability for your own education and learn how to educate yourself. But that taught us how to be independent in different ways.
I'd say less independent and more responsible, right? Ownership of the result.
Yeah, I think it's good.
Your children are your responsibility. You can't foist them off on the state. Sin in your life is your responsibility. It's not something you foist off on a pastor, that sense of responsibility.
Well, this went on a lot longer than I thought we thought it was going to go. Turned into a good conversation, I think. So I think we have definitely reached our time limit, but thank you all for watching. If you watched this long,
watch part 2.
I hope it was edifying, and you can watch the younger siblings talk about their experiences and what they've gotten from it,
and what they have to say about us, the dirt to share.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because I think of the younger siblings, Ethan is the only parent, so it'll be interesting to see what the difference is, because I think for all of us, being parents has changed a lot of what we notice or think about our parents. So it'll be interesting to see what they have to say. So thank you again for joining us, and I hope this was edifying.
Hit that like button.
No.
Smash that
Smash that bell.